You're just gonna have to trust me on this. 86 degrees. See that right there, that's wind shaking. So welcome back to the sawmill, friends. We have got some fantastic weather today. Let's make the most of it. Now, even though we don't have a full load for the kiln of this poplar we've been sawing for the past few weeks, I think today we're going to go ahead and put this in the kiln. Only got about 750 board feet, but I need to dry some and start putting up some walls in the new shop. So this poplar is 10 feet long, it's 9 inches wide, 4/4 on the thickness. Once we run it through the kiln, we'll bring it back down here, run it through the edger at 7 3/4 on the width, and then I'll take it to the wood shop and make some shiplap, and the finished dimension will be 3/4 by 7 1/4 by 10 foot long. So right here is about 500 board feet of the poplar. We got 2 open face pallets. Each of them has about 7 layers of lumber on it. That equals out to about 250 board feet per pallet if you're doing 4/4 on the thickness. We'll take these to the kiln, and I have one more over here beside the mill. Then right here's the third pallet. We'll put that on the top, and all 3 of those should give us around 750 board feet. Now my kiln will actually dry 4,000 board feet at a time. Who's blowing the horn up there? My goodness. What a mess. We got people up here on the main road driving beside each other, and it's only a 2-lane road, and they're hollering back and forth. I tell you what, what's wrong with people nowadays? So anyways, before I got interrupted by the domestic disturbance on the main road, my kiln will dry 4,000 board feet at a time if it's been air dried. If it's wet like this poplar isn't sopping wet. It's been sawed for a couple of weeks. The moisture content is probably around 20% or so. Poplar dries really fast. But on something like this, you want to put about 2,000 board feet in there, not 4,000. That way you don't overload the compressor. And I'll explain that more up at the kiln here in just a few minutes. Now friends, I was hoping to have about 1,500 board feet to go in the kiln on this initial run for this shiplap we're going to put on the walls up in the new building. But I got some decent excuses here. Number one, we started that project in Southwest Virginia. You guys have seen in the previous videos, and that's got me way behind on everything here, and that's fine. I knew that was going to happen. And number two, we got rain coming for like the next 4 days. So it's going to be really wet and nasty around here. And since it's winter time, it doesn't dry out. It's kind of like the mud season, I guess you would call it. So since all that's going on here this week, I ain't going to get a lot done outside with all this rain. At least I can have the kiln running and start drying this poplar. And it doesn't take poplar that long at all to dry in a kiln. It dries really fast. Let's warm up Mr. Cotto, because this is going to be the workhorse that takes all the lumber up to the kiln. Those people up there on the main road chasing each other and stuff, I tell you. A lot of you guys know this. I was a cop in my former career for about 15 years, and I saw a lot of stuff. And I would never look for a fight nowadays. If somebody came to me wanting to fight, I would smile and walk the other way. I'll tell you what. It's not worth it anymore. Everybody's got guns out here on them and nothing to lose. Then after the fight's over, they'll probably try to sue you. There's a lot to lose and stuff like that. I tell you what, walk the other way. There's nothing wrong with it. walk the other way, unless trouble comes to your property. And that's a whole lot different right there. I'm talking about public situations, I guess. If trouble comes here, that's a whole other ball game right there. Whole other ball game. Some glow plug action here. Do a little cold start for you guys that love diesel engines as much as I do. Even though it's not too cold today. It's pretty nice out here. It's about 45 degrees. Warmest day we've had in probably 2 months. Not 2 months, my goodness, Nathan. 2 weeks. 2 months ago, it was September. Look over me, my goodness. I'm low on diesel. I need to put a diesel tank down here sooner than later. And for those of you that are interested, that Kato right there has a 62 horsepower Kubota diesel engine. This machine is built in Japan, and this is not a promotion for them or nothing like that. But that machine right there is awesome, guys. I've had it for just about 2 years, and I tell you what, I wouldn't be without it. It's a great machine. All right, guys, since we're running back and forth so many times loading this kiln, I should take some logs out of the old log yard on every return trip down to the new log yard. This is a low-grade red oak, an 8-footer, about 24 inches, and it probably weighs about 1,600 pounds. That's a heavy log right there. Should be no trouble for Mr. Kato. All right, guys, got the lumber in there. Let's lower these baffles, even though they're not going to touch the lumber. Now, with a larger load in this kiln, this one's really small, like I was saying, you can drive 4,000 board feet in this kiln if you want to. It depends on the species. But with a normal load, these baffles right here, you would want them to come down and touch the top of your lumber right here. It's okay that we have a gap. That's what this insulation's for over here, closed cell insulation. So if you have a kiln, you got a gap right here on the top between your baffle and the lumber, make sure you cover that up. Because if you don't, the air that comes through this fan right here, these 4 fans on the top, will escape over the top of your lumber, and more importantly, not be forced through your lumber. That's what you want. For those of you new to this channel, this is a L200 kiln chamber made by Nile. They sell the kiln unit and this chamber. I think the total package, without the concrete of course, is around maybe $36,000 to $40,000, something like that. Add in about $5 more grand for the concrete. It's got to be insulated and pretty thick. So about $40,000 for this kiln right here. That's a lot of money, but if you can kiln dry your lumber at your sawmill, you're doing something a lot of other sawmills cannot do, and that's real important. You can pay for something like this really fast, extremely fast. I've never regretted having a kiln. This is my second kiln since I've been in this business. The first one was a smaller Nile. I sold it when I got the larger one. And sometimes I wish I would have kept it, but too late for that now. It's now a chicken house. So anyways, that's a story for another day. This kiln can do up to 4,000 board feet of lumber if it's an appropriate species for that amount of lumber. Meaning, if you put pine in here and it's green, pine is going to release that moisture really fast. You can't put 4,000 board foot of green pine in this kiln because the compressor back here, it's a dehumidification kiln. It's just like a dehumidifier. It pulls the water out of the air inside this unit. A kiln creates an atmosphere for lumber to dry. It doesn't dry your lumber. It creates an environment for your lumber to dry. So I got off target right there. So with pine, you put it in here and it's green, it loses water really fast in warm conditions. This kiln goes up to 150 degrees, or I'm sorry, 160 degrees when you do your heat cycle at the very end. But normal drying conditions is about 120 degrees in here. So if you put pine in here, it's 120 degrees. It loses the moisture so fast that that compressor can't keep up with it. Therefore, the lumber will start to mold. So if you have pine and it's 4/4 or poplar like this that dries really fast, I think Nile says you can do between maybe 1,500 to 2,000 board feet at a time. If it's air dried pine or poplar, you can load this baby up and do 4,000 board feet. If it's green red oak, you can put 4,000 feet in here because you're going to dry that really slow, not so fast as you would the pine and the poplar or cedar. So always keep that in mind. If you have a kiln and you got a lot of mold on your lumber, you're putting too much green lumber in it at once. That compressor can only handle so much moisture at a time. It will eventually get all the moisture out, but it will cause your lumber to mold. And I've seen that happen in my kiln when I didn't know any better years ago, and it happens really fast. And then you got to pull your lumber out, spray some bleach on it, try to get that mold off of it. Most of the time it's a losing battle, but sometimes you can correct it. But I've had, you know, decent luck on that. All right, so like I was saying, right there's the baffles. We got our 4 fans up there at the top. They are ran off of bow door motors, a really good system up there. This is extra insulation right here in this back corner. I'll leave it in here even if I don't use it because it takes up space, which does force all the airflow to go through your lumber. So that's always good. So back here, look over the echo is the main unit. Right there we got a blower on the top. Inside of there is the compressor and also the heater. So when the warm air comes through your lumber and comes out the back right here, see that vent down there at the very bottom? Hope you guys can see that. That's your intake. And there's a coil in there and a compressor, so all the water condenses, or all the moisture in the air rather, condenses down to water. That sounds a lot better, and drains out the back of the kiln through a little hose just via gravity. So that's how the kiln works right there. It's pretty simple. And the heater is in there as well. And when that's on, of course, it heats up and that fan forces out the warm air. Up around that very top corner, we have a vent. So if this kiln gets too hot, which it can sometimes, it will vent off and the heater will cut off until it reaches its ideal temperature or whatever your setting is. Over here on this wall, we have the handle for the baffle. Those yellow wires are probes. Those are moisture probes actually, and there's a box on the outside of the kiln that you get a reading from. So if you was drying a hardwood, you would take those probes right there and insert them on these little pins right here. And that gives you the moisture reading of your lumber while it's drying. With pine and poplar, it's so easy to dry, and there's one rule of poplar. I'll tell you guys about that here in a minute. If you don't follow that one, you may have some trouble, but other than that, there's really no, really no sense in putting those on a softwood like it. It's kind of easy to dry. And right there, that little stick going sideways, that is your electronic wet bulb. That tells the computer on the outside of this kiln the humidity inside the kiln and the temperature. That's extremely important. Without that, you're kind of in a bad way right there. You gotta know what the temperature is and the humidity in here. So a few things here, guys. When drying poplar, you want your wet bulb depression, which is the difference between your dry bulb and your wet bulb, to never be less than 10. If it gets less than 10, the conditions inside the kiln for poplar are too wet and the moisture's not coming out fast enough, and you'll get sticker stain on your boards, which is those little stickers I put on the boards. You'll have a stain underneath them and it won't come off even with a planer. You might go down to a ½ inch and get rid of them, but it's really hard to. And something else here that a lot of people talk about in these videos about kilns on YouTube is the dry bulb and the wet bulb. Here's the easy way to understand it. The dry bulb is the temperature inside the kiln. The wet bulb is pretty much the humidity. So if I set this kiln on 120 on the dry bulb, I want the temperature inside to be 120 degrees. If I got the wet bulb set on 90, my depression is 30, which is the number between those two, and the humidity set around 90. Now it's not really 90% humidity in there. It's on a different scale if you looked at the drying schedules, but that's an easy way of understanding this. So when I dry poplar, I'll usually set, well actually let me back up. Anytime I dry any lumber inside this kiln, I do 100 degrees for the first 24 hours. That way the lumber can get used to these heated conditions. I just don't shock it with 120 and go all in. Some guys do that and it's probably fine. I like to sneak up on it instead of going straight up there with that high temperature. I think it's better for the lumber in the long term. I could be wrong about that, but I've had good success drying here. So the first 24 hours I'll do 100 degrees and I'll set my wet bulb on about 85. So the compressor won't cut on until we hit 85 on the inside conditions of the kiln. And I usually don't hit that with 100 degrees. It usually has to be hotter for that lumber to really start releasing the moisture. So after the first day and letting this lumber get used to those conditions on poplar and pine, I'll go up to 120 on my dry bulb, which is 120 degrees, and I'll set the wet bulb at 80. Some people do 75, I do 80. So once it goes up to 120 degrees, that moisture really starts coming out of this lumber right here, and that wet bulb starts climbing really fast. And most of the time, for about 10 to 12 days, the compressor is running almost non-stop because of all the water coming out. Now, if you're doing hardwoods, it's totally different. I'm not going to confuse you guys today about that because hardwoods is a totally different science. This stuff right here is easy to dry. I like to do pine and poplar about 10% on the moisture content. If you go drier than that, like 8 or 6, when you run it through a planer or something like that, in my experiences, I've had a lot of tear out because it's too dry, and I've had to let it sit in my shop for an extra month or so and kind of acclimate and get some moisture back into it. So I think pine or poplar, around 10 or 12%, is perfect for woodworking or whatever you want to do with it, especially for shiplap, because we're going to mill all 4 sides of this lumber. And this will help us make sure that all the warm air that's coming down through those fans travels down on top of our baffles. This is part of our baffle now, and it's forced through the lumber. You got to get that hot air through your lumber to dry it. You can't not do this without baffles. You got to have them. All right, guys, before you all ask down in the comments, let me answer this question. Nathan, what are you going to do about this hole right here? Absolutely nothing. This stuff is easy to dry as long as my hot air is coming off the baffles through the lumber. Some of the air goes around this side. I'm not concerned with this. Now, if I was drying black walnut or red oak or maple or cherry, I would close this off with the insulation. But this stuff right here, guys, is so easy to dry. You don't have to do stuff like this. You can kind of skip this step. You can block this off if you want to, but you don't have to, in my opinion. Now, something people always ask is what's power in the kiln? Well, it's nothing special, guys, just 220. I think it pulls about 35 amps. I put a meter on it one time to check it when everything's running, so power bill's not too bad. If you ran this thing non-stop every month, every day of the week, in my area, it would probably cost about $350 for your power bill. And the reason I know that is I have a meter down here just for this kiln only, separate from the house. But I usually run it for 12 to 14 days at a time because my stuff is usually air dried or it's green like this. If it was green oak, I'd run it for a month, but green poplar and pine about 2 weeks. So when I run air dried stuff through this kiln, it's usually about 130 to 150 bucks, something like that. It's not too bad. It's really, really feasible as far as what it costs to dry lumber if you think about it that way, especially in the board footage increase in the value that you get from your lumber once you run it through a kiln. All right, so I'm gonna go over here beside the building and check all the fans real fast and make sure everything's running properly before we turn this thing on and shut the doors. That's one good thing about this kiln, you can test each component without turning the whole thing on. Yep, everything shows on and looks like everything's running. And before we turn this on, let me show you guys the scientific way on how we collect our water that comes out of the lumber. And it's right there. It's pretty crude, ain't it? That little hose right there just comes out of the kiln. That's hooked to the compressor. And it dumps in that 5-gallon bucket. Some people just let that go on the ground like that. Nothing wrong with that. But I like to measure how much water is coming out of the kiln every day. So I'll come down here, sometimes 3 times a day. I'll see how much water is coming out. That way you can kind of gauge how fast your lumber is drying, especially on pine and poplar, because you don't have any kind of moisture probes in there. Put my toboggan back on. Temperature is dropping just a little. So for those of you that might be interested, the temperature inside the kiln right now is 60 degrees. We'll come back up here in about 2 hours before this video ends, or maybe right at the end of it, and I'll tell you guys on the temperature change. I'd say by then we'll be at 95. I got it set at 100. It won't take it long. This chamber is well insulated. It holds heat very well. I don't have a trouble with keeping heat inside the kiln as far as holding my temperature. Usually, my only trouble is it gets too hot and the vent comes on because it's so well insulated. This chamber does a really good job. And if you want a container instead of a chamber like this, I think Nile also sells like a shipping container for this same kiln. You can get either one, I think. I went with this model for the main reason because shipping containers in my county in Tennessee that I live are actually outlawed. You can't have them. Ain't that crazy? I ain't never heard that before, but apparently that's the truth around here. So I guess we'll get Mr. Cotto and head back down to the sawmill and do some sawing. You guys hang in there. All right, guys, real fast. We're about to run out of daylight here. This is a sycamore that I started on about 2 days ago, and there's a large defect in it right there. You see that? That's wind shake right there, especially in the heartwood. That's where the grain kind of separates. That's a major defect in logs. And sycamore is kind of prone to it, especially large sycamore. This one right here is about 22 inches on the diameter. Whenever you have checks on the end of your logs, you got cracks usually running out from the pith right there on the center. You know, it runs on that plane right there. When you have wind shake, it runs right there on this plane right here. And my geometry is away from me right now. I can't think of the correct terms right here. But you can see that crack right there go right there on a radius, a radial crack. That sounds a lot better. I think I'm right about that. Math was never my strong point. Neither was geometry. So when you have that crack right there, the grain is separating from itself, and that right there is called wind-shaped, or heart-shaped rather. You know, there's a lot of different terms for it. Your regular checks are right here, shooting out this way. But when you see that right there, that's wind-shaped. If you're buying logs and you see that, make sure you take a good look at it. Make sure it's going to be worth your time. I didn't pay for these. They were free. It's sycamore from a local farmer. But right there is wind-shaped. When you have that, you start having separation of your grain right there. And this is worst case scenario in this log. That's really bad right there. So I'm hoping to saw down, actually, let me rephrase this. I'm hoping to flip this log over and start on the bottom and see if we can get some decent bowl blanks right here on the bottom. Trying to get some 3-inch thick bowl blanks, 8 inches wide out of this, and get rid of all this junk right here. This is firewood right here on the top. So I'm really not sure how much we're going to get done here, guys. My wife just sent me a text message and informed me we're going out to dinner in about an hour. I didn't know we was going to be doing that tonight, but I'm not going to say no because we're going to my favorite restaurant called Raphael's. It's Italian. Really good stuff. We're actually celebrating my birthday a few days late. It was a few days ago, and I've been so busy in Virginia, we didn't have time to do anything. And for those of you that are curious, I turned 45 the other day. 45. I don't look it, do I? I think I look older. What do you guys think? All right, guys, unfortunately, I think I'm done for the day, but I did get a few decent bulb lengths out of this sycamore right here. Has some pretty interesting colors right there in grain pattern. I don't mind sawing this stuff. It's just kind of hard to get decent sycamore saw logs. And most of the time, you're better off quarter sawing them. And I was going a little too slow, and the reason I can tell that is all the sawdust there on the face of this board. I need to speed up just a little bit on this sycamore, going a little too slow. But I'll come out here tomorrow if it's not raining too bad, and we'll get a bunch of blanks out of those two slabs right there. And if you're interested in these little bow blanks right here, they're 3 inches thick, 8 inches square. There's a link down below to my website. If there's any left, I'll put them on there. Go check it out. If there's not any left, hopefully I can get some more sycamore pretty soon, and I'll saw them up and sell them to you guys. But we're not done yet, guys. As promised, let's go up to the kiln real fast and check the temperature. I'm betting 92 degrees. Either 92 or 93, one of the two. Let's go check it out. It never fails, I always drive off and leave my tripod. I should buy like 10 of them and have them spaced periodically around the farm. That'd be a lot smarter, wouldn't it? Right there it is, right where I left it. For those of you curious, I use these little Joby tripods. I think that's how you pronounce it, I'm not sure. They're like $80 a piece. And you can really beat the crap out of them and they'll last a long time. I've had this one for about a year. All right, guys, let's see here. You're just gonna have to trust me on this. 86 degrees. So, it's taking longer than I thought it would, but I didn't think about this. There's more room inside that kiln to heat up than usual. That's my little disclaimer right there, I guess. Normally I have 2 or 3 times that amount of wood, so there's less area to warm up. So that's probably why I thought it was gonna get warmer faster. Or, that's how I'm going to make an excuse for myself, one of the two. It sounds good though, don't it? But it won't take it long. I'd say by 8 or 9 o'clock tonight, we'll be at 100 degrees. No problem. All right, guys, I guess I'm done for the night. Thanks for watching, I really appreciate it. And this video kind of turned into a video about Nile kilns and how to dry lumber. I really didn't plan that, but that's what I had planned for the day. So that's kind of where we went, I guess. So anyways, hope you guys learned something. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys back here soon.